Can you really win a fight with a single decisive punch? That's the powerful, pervasive idea of one hit, one kill that has influenced the practice and development of karate. But is it truth or just a myth? Welcome to Great Karate Myths, debunking the legends. Today, we're dissecting Ikken Hissatsu, examining how this swordsman's ideal, likely from the Jigen-ryu, was adopted by pioneers like Funakoshi Gichin. We discuss the evidence of its singular influence in Kihon and Kata application, and debate if this emphasis on a single blow has been detrimental to the development of the art. You might be surprised where it belongs and where it doesn't. Okay, Tom, take it away. The myth of one hit, one kill.
All right, yeah. Ikken Hissatsu. One hit, one kill, or to decisively kill with one fist. I think the reason we're talking about it is because it's had such a huge influence on karate, particularly the development of karate, and it sort of echoes throughout. So we're going to look at some of the different areas that it's influenced and what kind of influence this idea of finishing with one punch or killing the opponent with one punch has had on the development of karate. And it comes from Japanese swordsmanship, most likely the Jigen-ryu, which in its own philosophy is to kill the opponent with one stroke of the sword, and there shouldn't be the need for a second one. And we know that Matsumura and Kawasato were both teachers or practitioners, and at least of the Jigen-ryu. So that influence is strongly come down through them to Gichin Funakoshi and other teachers that developed modern karate. So yeah, that's what we're talking about today. I can kick off the first point if we want, or if anyone wants to jump in and add to that.
Well, I think Mike Tyson could have done Ikken Hissatsu.
He could, yeah, possibly.
I jest. No, Tom. Why don't you and Matt unfold it between you, because you're both quite experienced in the use of a Japanese sword.
Well, the idea of one stroke of the sword to finish the opponent, you can see it in the way that the karate basics have been developed. So that you get the oizuki, the stepping punch, for example, and it's always done singular. So you march up and down and you do one at a time, and it's done decisively, and it's that. So there's an echo of that there, and there's a strong influence of that in across the board in karate practice. So when you see the interactive kumite, the one-step sparring, the counter is usually a singular counter. So a block and then a single punch counter, as if that is an end in itself. So we've talked a lot about the Tenno Kata over the last few weeks, and there's certainly the Jigen influence in that, and that decisiveness of stepping forward and punching, and that's an end, and then you reset. And then in the second section, you perform an uke, and then you counter, and that's an end, and then you reset. So there's the idea of needing anything else, it doesn't seem to be present, and it influences the way that karate is organized. So if you were punching or stepping and punching with the idea that your first punch might not do the job, and you had to do 20 more punches in order to win the fight or something like that, I wonder how different the Kihon practice would actually be. But it doesn't seem to be set up in that way, that you perform a technique and they're ready to go again. It's that singular, each technique is an end in itself. So yeah, that's I think my starting point on that.
Well, Jigen-ryu it emphasizes it's a second strike shouldn't even be considered. So it's a very it's a doctrine. The sword is held often above the right shoulder in Jigen-ryu. There are various starting positions, but that's the classic one. And then the opponent is advanced on with the idea of destroying them with a single cut, as Tom's basically said. I've got one thing I wanted to add to this conversation that is a little bit on the controversial side. It's one of the things. There's a rusticness, if that's a proper word, to the practice of Jigen-ryu, which consists of thousands of strikes at a wooden post, sometimes even a tree. It could be a dead tree or even a living tree. And I remember remarking to Tom one day. I mean, Tom has a capability with a bokken, a wooden sword, and that's what the Jigen-ryu were using. And one of the things I liked were the sort of rustic bokkens, having been brought up on the neat, smoothly planed, manufactured, commercial wooden practice swords. It seems that members of the Jigen-ryu have just used sort of sticks used from that they've cut themselves, and in fact, my two sons actually trained that way. With we chose English blackthorn because it's tough, and they could strike, and they did. And it took them quite a while to break these swords. So both of my boy Oi and Todd, they went at a post and occasionally a dead tree. We avoided living trees. And there was something very satisfying. But I commented to Tom one day, having done some homework some years ago, and realizing that there were strategies during the warring periods in Japan. So we're looking at the 16th century. It's still a bit of a nightmare. And characters like Masashi Miyamoto sprang out of that period. But one of the doctrines, battlefield doctrines, was to really, in a total all-out battle, was to destroy the enemy, which unfortunately frequently included chasing them down if they're retreating and cutting them down whilst they're retreating. Doesn't come across as particularly chivalric, probably because it isn't. I put it to Tom one day, having been in a discussion about the use of a striking post and a bokken, and I said, you don't have to start your training with a big distance and run at the post and strike it, and not all of the training. I'm not saying all of the training against the post was like that, but the Jigen-ryu seemed to have been quite well known for that, and I just wonder if there wasn't an element of inculcating the trainee into the practice of pursuing fleeing enemies to destroy their numbers, to stop regrouping, to put an end to the competition. I don't really have much in the way of evidence for that, but in a brutal way, it makes sense. Notwithstanding that, the Jigen-ryu, but now these days, and things have changed, as I've commented in previous podcasts, you can see the practice of the Jigen-ryu school on YouTube. It's not difficult to find, and they are big proponents for hitting the striking post, and in a very formidable way. And they have a particular so I can't remember what it's called. It's a scream, but in their ki has some sort of bizarre. It's quite scary. It's all deliberately designed, obviously, and that accompanied with the practice of starting at a considerable distance from the striking post and approaching it rapidly, in very single-minded manner, and then hitting it rather hard with the idea, which was the point of the discussion, of the Ikken Hissatsu, which is, I'm going to lazily translate as one hit, one kill. I mean, there is a classic translation, but I like that one because it captures the thinking. And no need for a second strike. Then it is the case that there is that single committed Oizuki type thinking in modern karate that was quite an anathema, for instance, to a Western boxer who's used to combinations. And I'm not saying karate doesn't use combinations, in modern karate rather, but the sort of traditional quotes karate does. And Tom is quite right to identify this sort of singular unit that moves in the way of Jigen-ryu, in the way of the thinking of Jigen-ryu fencers.
I say it's interesting that you bring up the Ki of Jigen-ryu because in Henning Whitwer's collected essays through his translations, he points out that Gichin Funakoshi borrowed the Ki of the Jigen-ryu in one of his books. And he also notes that Gichin Funakoshi had access to the Jigen-ryu scrolls through his teacher, Azato Anko, and which is really quite fascinating. And you can see where that influence may have been, some of the philosophy and some of the ideas were drawn into the development of, particularly of Shotokan, and that decisiveness of one fist, one hit, one kill, and the development in the Kihon, and also the Makiwara post as well. It's always done singular. It's a singular blow, and you reset, and then you do another one. The idea of combinations or keeping going and until the job's done, and it doesn't seem to align with the way that karate developed.
I believe Jigen-ryu has kata as well, right?
It does, yeah. It has 2-man sets, but there's not it's not a vast system like the Katori Shinto Ryu or other sword schools, and it's kind of emphasized. I mean, I don't know too much about it because I've not ever practiced it, but it emphasizes, the main thrust of it is that to go first and to win and to kill with the first stroke. That's what they're, are completely overwhelming the opponent. But just going to jump back to the karate because I just wanted to add one thing, which was this idea of decisively winning or killing the opponent with a single blow has even found its way into karate competition. So the point scoring competition type thing, sparring. So if you land your reverse punch, if it's a clean technique and a clean punch, you score and you can potentially win the match, or a single kick. So there's that idea of you win through a decisive blow, even though the reality is that reverse punch might not have finished the opponent or anything like that, but you scored the point, and so you win the match, and it was decisive enough, and the technique was, good enough to win the match. So it's found its way. I think that's a representation of that in a competition format, that you're not winning through combinations and scoring lots of points. You score with a reverse punch or a roundhouse kick or a back fist or whatever, and you win that way. And that was another thing that came to mind with that one hit, one kill.
You're quite right, Tom. It also that explains what that format is generally ineffective when it comes to any full contact matches. We see you see exchanges of multiple blows and kicks in full contact, which completely is completely against the idea of the Ikken Hissatsu. It just almost shows that it's a theory with if you're unarmed. Certainly not a theory if you're armed with a razor sharp live, bladed a Japanese katana. In which case, yep, you got a good chance of pulling that off, of being able to cut someone down with a single blow. Just as an aside, I think that if I recall, Funakoshi Gichin Sensei was influenced by the flavor of the monk-in swordsmanship of the luminary Nakayama Hakudo, who was really quite a well-known sort of popular swordsman, moving swordsmanship to in the direction of modern kendo, and I think we've discussed this before, but I think that Funakoshi Gichin's sensei's kokutsu dachi was influenced by Nakayama Hakudo. And if I recall, Nagamine Shoshin sensei, the Shorin-ryu, the Matsubayashi Shorin-ryu karate master, in one of his publications, mildly berated Funakoshi Gichin Sensei. And if I recall, he said, well, there was no need to create the backstance, the kokutsu dachi, because karate, we already had it within karate, the nekoashi dachi, the cat stance, which is, I suppose, by visual observation, is similar to the back stance, but just a lot shorter. So, yeah, I think Funakoshi Gichin Sensei was considerably influenced by the swordsman Nakayama Hakudo.
Yeah, the other thing is the idea of one hit, one kill from a karate punch, a straight punch. It's just non-existent. It's just never going to happen, is it? When you see boxing matches, whether it's bare knuckle boxing, and anyone who gets seriously injured in that is usually a hook or an uppercut. And in the street fights, it's usually someone getting hit with a hook who then is knocked unconscious and hits their head on the floor and dies from that, not from necessarily the blow itself. And so this idea of the straight reverse punch or unless you've got a weapon in your hand, no, it's not going to work, is it?
Well, I was wondering if in fact that was the intention of Gichin Funakoshi when he incorporated this principle, because it's an embodiment of an idea, isn't it? He was an intelligent man, he was an educated man, and I hesitate to ascribe to him the notion that he felt that a punch, an oizuki to the solar plexus, could end an opponent. I think, for me anyway, it seems, and perhaps I'm way off base here, but it seems like it's the embodiment of an idea, and it to me it forms a picture of somebody who, an educated man of a samurai family, who's a bit nostalgic for that kind of Bushido spirit, and wanted to try and embody that in the practice that he was creating. And so that would lead me to suggest that it's people that came after that decided, oh yeah, the master must have been onto something. We can absolutely, with the right amount of training and the right amount of hammering our fists on a Makawara board, we could achieve the one hit, one kill. And so it starts to get sort of disfigured as it goes down. And perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps I'm misattributing an idea or thought with Gichin Funakoshi, but it just seems like it was an attempt to embody something which is not totally without value. That there's value in practicing with intent and decisiveness as a principle.
I think also in terms of that nobility, it's almost that with a sword, that one hit, one kill almost seems humane. It's almost that honourable thing not to let your opponent be cut down in small pieces and
That Sinead, I'm going to have to kill you nicely.
it's not nice. It's not nice.
No, you're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. Historically, that is the thinking.
I think just adding to Matt, you find in the Shotokai this idea of total commitment taken even further in the exploration and development of the Shotokai punch, and their stances are even deeper and the distances are longer, and they completely commit to one technique. That is kind of explored even, it's taken even further in the Shotokai by Agami and Tadao Okayama.
I was hoping we weren't going to go into Okayama. I'm not in a good space personally with with some of his activities during World War II. But I think you're right about the depth of stance. I remember because I experienced it, and I remember the types of training sessions where people collapsed with fatigue. It wouldn't happen these days. But classes were jam packed because there was not the availability of martial arts schools. You can see them in big cities. Yeah, certainly in London, you could find them from the 60s onwards. In cities like London and Paris, you could. So Henry Prilly Sensei in Paris, in Paris, and you could find Mitsusuke Harada Sensei in London. I think as early as 67, perhaps. And I memories escaping me, but you really massive demand occurred in after the release of I don't know which order they're in, so please forgive me. But after the release of I think it was Enter the Dragon, although I don't think that one was filmed first at all. But by the time that one came out, then martial arts had you had a sort of a parallel cinematographic situation where you had the sort of Warner Brothers David Carradine Shaolin Temple, which was lovely, great soundtrack, and and you had it almost in stark contrast the cinematographic gymnastic violence and incredibleness of Bruce Lee, although he wasn't the first. Jimmy Wang Yu had done lots of stuff for, I think it's probably Shaw Brothers, and lots of other actors as well. But this kind of fueled the whole thing. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, you're quite right, Tom, those big, deep stances were being ferociously pursued by the Shotokan that had evolved out of the ideas of Higami Shigeru, spurred on by the punch that he had, the soft punch, and the soft sounds ineffective. Right? Well, present company knows it's anything but ineffective. It's a penetrating punch that is fearsome. Within the context of karate, once again, there's no evidence to show that it could ever go in any way in direct confrontation with a good Western style box or a Thai box, or even and I'm not knocking the Shotokai school, far from it, but it's not something that they've ever been particularly keen on proving, because they stick to their tenet that that karate is not about competition or tournament, and which is why they scrupulously avoided it, or one reason. But notwithstanding, they are very much grounded in the one hit, one kill idea, which I think our original point was whether this has been detrimental to karate practice or not. My choice is to ask it as a question rather than to make a statement. Although I do know what I think already, but has it been detrimental? Has Ikken Hissatsu been detrimental to the development of karate?
I think it has its place, as Matt pointed out, that kind of embodying that idea or as an intention, and it certainly belongs with the Tenno Kata and the development of Shotokan and the Kihon, and but I think it doesn't have any place. It's an idea that doesn't fit with the antique forms, which come from completely different culture and way of thinking, and so Ikken Hissatsu finishing, one hit, one kill doesn't belong in Kusanku or in Sanchin or anything like that. And I think it's influenced so much the way that people apply kata, particularly the antique forms. You can see bunkai always ending with a decisive hit. It always finishes with like a decisive blow. So it's everywhere, even in the mainstream bunkai with the antique forms. And so that's something that began in the use of the sword, has found its way into the way people approach applying the antique forms, but I don't think it belongs there. So I don't think where does it belong in karate? And I think it belongs in certain areas and not other aspects of it. That would be my answer to it. I don't think it's been detrimental, but I just think it's, there are very particular influences and directions it's taken the development of karate and the way that people approach the Chinese source material.
Yeah, I'm definitely on board with that. I think that's nicely said. It's just, it's hard to say whether it's been beneficial or detrimental. It's just been misappropriated and filtered into things or areas where it just should never have gone. And that's not down to the original notion itself. That's down to individuals over time misapplying and misusing, based on the faulty assumption that the techniques that you're practicing with the antique forms particularly are for fisticuffs. They're for empty hand fighting. Oddly enough, I mean, especially those that are supposed to be utilizing weapons, maybe a one hit, one kill is too strong a way of thinking about it, but striking techniques with weapons do tend to be fairly decisive. Just as an interesting side point.
I think the way that the antique forms are structured, if you're delivering a strike with a weapon, for example, the sai, if you borrow something from, say, San or something like that, you're not in a position where if your strike didn't work, you would then immediately be vulnerable for being cut down yourself.
Hmm.
I think that the development and the structure of it is that you're delivering a strike or a hit or whatever, but then you're also in a position to carry on, should you need to, if it wasn't decisive. But the idea that it should be decisive on the first one, I don't think is part of it. It could be, but I don't think that was the thinking of the antique kata that went into creating them. The thinking of the antique forms that went into developing them was that you would be decisive with the strike. It could happen, but I don't think that the intention was necessarily driven towards finishing it with one. I think that the idea was that if you needed to continue, you could, or you could quickly move on to something else. So positional dominance is a core factor of the antique forms as well. Not just you deliver a big hit and it's over. It's finding yourself in a position where you have an advantage to deliver more than one. It's like a boxer's guard, isn't it? That the idea is not to throw one punch, is to keep throwing lots and lots. And I think it's the same with the weapons. You'd want to keep going until the job's done. So the idea of almost looking at it like, well, I've done a hit, why is it not working? Oh, I need to do another one. That if you think like that, you're going to slow yourself down and almost get in your own way.
That is, Tom described earlier, the fundamental difference between the antique kata and Funakoshi Gichin Sensei's creation of the tenor and also his creation of the Kaikyoku no kata, which was the same thing. And to support what Michael said in here, I think during the late 1880s, the great heavyweight bare knuckle champion John L. Sullivan had a fight. And well, check this. It went 70-something rounds. I mean, that's incomprehensible. So that might tell a listener or viewer what was that, or what might suggest what that punching and blocking and parrying. And for anyone that's watched, the great Jack Johnson, and looking at the way they shuffled and parried, and you're seeing a fencing competition without the swords. You're seeing something sponsored by wealthy patrons, by no sexism intended, by gentlemen, and it's incomprehensible. It's incomprehensible that to imagine that a current, a modern day mixed martial arts fight would last 70-something rounds. So they were obviously fighting in a different way, doing something quite different. But here's the main point. It was bare knuckle. So any blows were not landed with padded or protective fists, which is a challenge for both parties, for both competitors. It has been written in the past, and I know very well that that's why they didn't hit with full power, because they didn't want to damage their own fists. But anyone that's hit anything knows that. Oh God, I don't want to sound like a thug here. If you hit the ribs, you get less that a hook to the ribs doesn't hurt as much as a hook to another place. And I think that these things cannot be confused or conflated. That the one hit, one kill of karate is a completely different entity from the Ikken Hissatsu that we're talking about. That is a swordsmanship ideal most likely from the Jigen-ryu, used as a base for the formation of the modern and postmodern, not postmodern so much, the modern karate, the creation of not only Funakoshi Gichin Sensei, but also Miyagi Chojin Sensei of the Goju-ryu school, or rather the Goju-ryu founder. General question here. What does Kusanku do? Or let's ease this up a bit. What doesn't it do? It doesn't serve as a template for modern Western urban self-defense in the street or in nightclubs or pubs or bars. It doesn't do that. No, if you look at the list of, I think, Tom, you might have the longest collection of actual, proper, true applications of kata of anyone I know. You've got the Kuzenko, you've got the Tsunta, you've got the Passai, you've got the Weichi series, Sanchin Seizan, Sanseru. You've got, the whole gamut, the whole lot. That's incredible, really. And I think we have every right to be, hopefully in the future, taken seriously for that work and that understanding. Notwithstanding the practices that we have that originally started life as the idea of barefoot Zen, which was the idea of objectifying meditation between pairs. Yeah, we've got that too. How can you make it actually meditation? What we can do that. It's not that we're not Superman or Superwoman. We can do no more than our physical bodies and puny brains allow us to do. But the wealth of knowledge at our disposal is a fabulous recompense for the sheer amount of time that all of us have put into this.
And that concludes another episode of Great Karate Myths Debunking the Legends. Today, we've established that the doctrine of one hit, one kill is primarily a swordsmanship ideal. A single committed action that shaped the singular focus of modern Kihon practice. The intent and decisive commitment are invaluable, but its singular approach stands in contrast to the continuous positional dominance and follow-up needed in the antique forms. Thank you for joining us to debunk the myth of Ikken Hissatsu. If you enjoyed this discussion, please subscribe to Great Karate Myths wherever you listen to podcasts,